Good evening. I'm Karen Sander, the Director of Public Programs for the CUNY Graduate Center, and we are so delighted to have you join us here tonight for what promises to be a thought-provoking conversation on hostile architecture and democratic design for the future. I'd like to welcome those of you who are here in person, but also welcome our large online audience who are tuning in from places around the globe and may experience hostile architecture differently than here in New York City. For tonight's program, we are pleased to partner with the Bernard and Ann Spitzer School of Architecture at City College, and we are also grateful to our own PhD program in Anthropology and Earth and Environmental Science and our Public Space Research Group for co-sponsoring tonight's event. The Graduate Center, is a hub for graduate education in the CUNY system. Our more than 50 research centers, PhD, and master's programs focus on ways that research and scholarship can inform and educate the public, like we are doing tonight. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our esteemed panel, who have a rock star panel here tonight, who are going to offer some really interesting different perspectives on the topic. So let me start out, first of all, to my immediate left is our moderator and the brainchild for this panel, the Graduate Center's own Setha Low, who is a distinguished professor in psychology, anthropology, earth and environmental sciences, women's and gender studies here at the Graduate Center. She has done extensive research on public space in Latin America and the United States, and has written over 10 books, right? More than that, right? I can't even keep track. Over 10 books on the topic. She is also the director of the Graduate Center's Public Space Research Group. Next to her is Anna Kodé, an award-winning features reporter with the New York Times, where she covers the built environment, culture, and urban life. She's written about the urban design of Sesame Street, the death of the public bench, and the cultural significance of steel fences. The past 3 years in a row, she's won awards from the National Association of Real Estate Editors for her writing on architecture. Anna is also an adjunct professor at NYU and the author of Unseen Places, a forthcoming book about observation. Next to her is Marta Gutman, who is an architectural and urban historian and is dean of the Spitzer School of Architecture at City College. Expert in the history of public architecture for children and in repurposing architecture as a strategy for city building, she studies ordinary places in cities. She started her career as an architect designing housing for the New York City Housing Authority and shelters for battered women, abused children, and homeless New Yorkers. She has written numerous books and is currently writing Just Space, Modern Architecture, Public Schools, and Racial Inequality in New York City. Next, it is my pleasure to introduce Jerome Haferd, who is an architect, public artist, and educator based in Harlem, and is principal of the award-winning Jerome Haferd Studio. Haferd is an assistant professor of architecture at City College's Spitzer School of Architecture, where he co-directs the Place, Memory, and Cultural Incubator. His practice critically engages built environment projects in urban and rural contexts, often looking to Black, Indigenous, and other marginalized histories to unlock a new imaginary for architecture, design, and cultural infrastructure. His work on complex sites includes collaborations with the Harlem African Burial Ground, Roots to Sky Sanctuary, Park Avenue Armory, National Black Theater, and numerous public agencies. He is lead designer for the 2023-24 Cultural Creativity and Care Initiative with Harlem Grown and the Mellon Foundation. And his team's recent projects include the Sankofa and Aliyah installations in Harlem, the first prize-winning Africatown International Design Idea Competition, the Black Box in New York, and Beautiful Browns in St. Louis. And finally, our last panelist is the wonderful Tamar Renaud, who is the New York State Director at Trust for Public Land, where she leads a team working to expand access to the outdoors by creating trails, revitalizing schoolyards, and protecting public land. With a background in public health and experience at Vital Strategies, the New York City Health Department, and the UN, she brings deep expertise in improving community health and the environment. Now I turn it over to Setha Low.
Hi, good evening. So wonderful to see everyone here, and I want to start by thanking Karen, who makes all this possible, and to my panelists who have been willing to come and be part of what started really on a whim. I was thinking about doing something else here as a panel. I like to do public programs, and I kept being interviewed, and Anna was actually one of them, about hostile architecture. Within a period of about a month, I must have had 3, maybe 4 long interviews about hostile architecture. And when I mentioned that to Karen, Karen said, "That's what we should talk about." Karen said, "Don't forget, the other things. We'll talk about hostile architecture." But we didn't want to just talk about hostile architecture. I think we really also wanted to begin to highlight what would more democratic public spaces really look like? How can we turn our city into a place that is really welcoming and a site of belonging for everyone, instead of focusing on what New York seems to become as an icon of hostile architecture. And so what I'm going to do is just ask a few questions to each of our panelists, and they're going to tell you about hostile architecture and the ways we can get around it or fight it, and hopefully in the end you'll join us in the conversation. So I'm going to start with Anna, who actually did ask me this question, and now I'm sending it back to her. What is hostile architecture, Anna, and why should we care?
Hostile architecture, well, thank you for sending that back to me, by the way. I knew it would come back. Hostile architecture is any space that is designed intentionally to be unwelcoming or uncomfortable. Typically, as you know, it targets unhoused individuals, but really it can affect anyone, the elderly, parents, children, all of us. And I think the reason that we need to really think about it right now is because we're in this moment of heightened isolation and anxiety and loneliness and a fractured society, and this is space that only furthers that divide, I would say.
That's right. So if we should care, in what ways can we care more?
I think thinking about it as something that affects us all is really helpful, and thinking about all of the lost interactions from hostile architecture as we go through our days here in the city or wherever people might be, moments that you might otherwise be sitting on a bench chatting with someone that now there's nowhere to sit.
Exactly. I mean, particularly in the subway. Do you want to show?
Yes, I have a video that explains this all further.
Yeah, based on Anna's article in the New York Times, I'm not sure who actually developed the whole video. It was Anna's and others, I assume. We do have a video that really brings up what is hostile architecture. So could we run that, please?
Much of city life plays out on benches, just like this one. Right now, I see a couple with their dog, a man reading a newspaper, senior citizens resting after a long day. But the bench, as we know it in New York City, is fading. At the $1.6 billion Moynihan train station, which is a modern public space, there's a noticeable lack of seating. Many people sit on the floors while they're waiting for their trains. And earlier this year, the MTA rolled out leaning benches in one of its subway stations. This is an example of hostile architecture. A lot of it is aimed at keeping homeless people out of public spaces. To see how we got here, we need to go back several decades. Central Park opened in 1858, and it was this early, massive investment in public space for New Yorkers. This came in the form of a bench known as the Central Park settee. It's kind of delicate looking. It has these thin, flared legs made of cast iron, which was this popular, easy-to-use, moldable material. Around 60 years later came the Christie Forsyth bench. This bench is bulkier than the settee. It has this concrete base. You can see it's usually entrenched into the ground. But both options were similar in that neither of them had armrests. Without armrests, there's more social interaction that can take place. But then the country entered the Great Depression, and there was this spike in homelessness. Many people were sleeping in Central Park at the time, including on its benches. Enter Robert Moses. He was this infamous city planner in New York City history who is often remembered for his aggressive approach to reshaping the city's built environment in ways that were often at the expense of poorer communities and people of color. For the 1939 World's Fair, Moses partnered with a furniture maker named Kenneth Lynch, and they created 8,000 new benches for the city to use. This bench had one stark feature: these hoop dividers. These armrests made it way harder for people to sleep on these benches or spend a lot of time on them. Even the settee and the Christie Forsyth bench have versions that are made with armrests now. The messaging at this point was clear. If we don't provide places of respite, the homeless would simply disappear. But all these changes, all these redesigns did not, in fact, solve homelessness. This year, an estimated 4,500 people were living on the city's streets and subways, a 2-decade high. And as of July, there were 104,000 people sleeping in the city shelters. The spread of the leaning bench and the lack of seating at places like Moynihan or around the city signals to homeless individuals that they are not welcome in these places. It signals to all New Yorkers that these are not social places. These are places to simply pass through.
It's a great film. And of course, it does really reinforce the point that it makes places that we should all be together not relating in this moment of real division and separation. So Marta, you're our historian for today. Was it always this way? I mean, is this something new, or has this been going on for a while? What's your take on what we're seeing now?
I've got 3 things to handle. Hi, everybody. Hello on Zoom as well. I think we have, I think it's complicated. And so I wanted to show a couple of slides about Central Park that give us some sense of how complicated the question about hostility in architecture is. I mean, hostility in architecture dates to the beginning of architecture. It's not to the beginning of the built environment. But Anna's presentation and discussion of Central Park made me think, or prompted me to think about the origins of Central Park and the way in which we can see in its planning, in the making of a park that was advertised as a democratizing public space by its designers and its patrons, Frederick Law Olmsted, Calvert Vaux, and all the powerful people who back them, that the claim to democratizing, of course, is tainted by the way in which the park was made. And so we all, I think, in this audience are probably familiar, or if not, will soon be, that the park's lands were claimed through expropriation from folks who lived on them. They included African Americans who settled in the area you see colored red on the Ville survey made to make the park, and who lost their housing. And so what counts as democratizing and what counts as hostile is complicated. And for me, I find the thinking that of a philosopher, sociologist, and political scientist named Henri Lefebvre to be very helpful, in which he asks us to recognize that space is made physically through expropriation, socially, through deciding that certain groups of people the spaces will be made for, and then discursively, and in the case of Central Park, I think we can, the kind of architecture was an architecture that was intended to celebrate and see the roots of our democracy in nature. it gets even more complicated or more disturbing when we think about the kinds of houses that were destroyed in order to make the park. And so we don't have any photos of Seneca Village per se, nor do we have any photos of the people who live there, but we do have photos of what some of the so-called shanty towns look like on the park. And here's one of them. The photographs and the representations of these buildings are intended to make us disparage them, to not value them, to not think of them in ways that recognize how empowering they are. And Leslie Harris, in her wonderful book on African American life in New York City in the antebellum era, makes the point that settlements like Seneca Village and Weeksville were prompted by a change in the state constitution that required Black men to own property in order to vote. White men were not required to own property, but Black men were. And so the houses that are here, as shabby as they may look, are full of profound possibility for formerly enslaved and free people. And so this is why I say, do we have what is hostile architecture for the people who made Central Park? This is hostile for the people who lived in the houses. Not at all. And in a moment, I just would like to take, I have one or two more slides to show, but in a moment in which we look at encroaching autocracy, the Times had an article, an op-ed on that this morning. I think it's very important to recognize the role of the academy in doing the research that exposes these histories. Roy Rosenzweig and Betsy Blackmar, who wrote the book, The Park and the People, Diana Zagreb-Wall and Anne Rothschild, Diana coming from City College, who did the archaeology to uncover Seneca Village. And then another person from American Studies, whose work I admire enormously, Lisa Goff, who wrote a book called Shanty Towns, and a book documenting the forgotten landscapes of the working poor. So I just want to say that there are multiple ways then in which we can recognize our own role and our own responsibility in this situation. When in relationship then to the question of democracy, I think, and of benches, I think this is a illustration I use in my book on Oakland, although it is an illustration that documents a scene in New York in the fraught 1870s, a time not so different from our own, and it shows the ways in which city streets, which did not have benches until city streets, that is, not park streets. City streets didn't have benches until provided by the municipality until 2012. It's a very, very recent innovation. And so for this woman shown in the middle of a very cold winter in New York in 1876 and projected on, illustrated that was on the front of the most important magazine in the country, Harper's Weekly, you see her turning a curbstone into a place to sit and to display her needs in public. And you see her presenting herself, and I think this wonderful quote, benches are places that people who have nowhere to go. Observers of the public realm have long pointed out that depriving people in distress of a place to sit down is gratuitous cruelty, and I can't imagine a better illustration of that point than this particular idealized drawing. But it also shows, again, this way in which the presentation of needs in public, which Setha has written so wonderfully about, is activated by the connections that are drawn between women and children in this particular illustration. And so I could go on forever. I'm not allowed to. But I would like then to offer this slide, or this photo, which is undated and it's drawn from the article in Places that I cited on the previous slide. to offer yet another take on the meaning of public space, to offer a segue to our talk about democratizing aspects of public architecture, and how, again, in thinking about a modest park bench, I think this bench was built in front of Central Park, full of kids, looking at the photographer, eating their lunch, totally casual, creates an instantiation of democratizing architecture in the context of an environment that was not particularly friendly to children.
Right, so that it's always been with us is what you're saying, but it's extremely nuanced, and different histories created different kinds of restrictions, and I love how you added in that those restrictions can be designed, but they can be social or discursive. I mean, I like that you're making that point. It can be done through language and just keeping people out, but the design makes a difference. So let's turn to Jerome. And so Jerome, you're our designer, artist for the evening. How would you make an alternative, more democratic space that responds to all of these different needs?
Can I get the clicker for mine? I guess it's my turn in the relay race, but that was a great segue. And, I'm not going to have one answer of what to do. And I also have some images that if anything, I have done some things that I'm going to show which start to speak to that. But I think, to kind of follow on Marta, who's bringing up a number of things, including how indeed first of all, there are privately owned public spaces, and then there are public, capital P, public spaces, and then how spaces like our public parks can be both the sort of enabler and the aggressor, right, historically. I thought that was a really great point that you made. And so, I think one thing that I have done is to sort of begin to intervene strategically, both in temporary and maybe more permanent ways. And in this case, within capital P public space. I'm going to show a number of projects very quickly that are working with public agencies like the New York City Parks Department in Harlem and Department of Transportation and NYCHA, where these things are quite nuanced. So this is a project up here in Harlem, about 2 blocks away from where I live, that was a temporary art installation called Sankofa, which really began to, as a temporary work, sort of consider other ways of sitting and gathering, and also do this with the help and the strategic advice of my community and local residents. I think that's one of the things that really is part of this, is the acknowledgement, like you started with, that all of public space is co-stewarded, whether we acknowledge it or not. So anything we do is subject to a kind of stewardship, and this project which really was a series of places to sit, and to sit in proximity to one another and facing one another. And these, when you call something an artwork, you can get away with a lot, let's just say that. But there was pressure to make these seating surfaces, let's say, less hospitable. And we just didn't end up doing that. And it worked out. But it did have to be co-stewarded, and really the placement of this and the kind of architecture of it was really done with the advice of folks who are in the park every day, which we might talk more about. So kind of the benches is, of course, such a big issue. You see some of those that you were talking about in the background there, which have been replaced since then. But again, just places to rest. And what's the trade-off what is the cost benefit of not providing places to sit and rest? We do know that then you have to maintain these spaces. And if anything, a lot of these agencies in these spaces, especially in Harlem, are underfunded, right? And this is a project that's in development right now with the Percent for Art program and EDC and Parks Department, which again, in this case, is an artwork. But at this point, learning from Sankofa, just thought, can we produce a place to sit that seems really a part of a kind of agenda there. And also companion seating, right, when you do that for multi-abled folks. And then I'll just end here with some of these this work. This is actually now a permanent work with NYCHA at the Kingsborough Houses in Brooklyn, recently opened, called Migration, which really was a kind of heritage walk, but again, sort of bringing voices of the community and a sense of belonging to a sort of NYCHA campus. And, really kind of figuring out little acts that intervene within some of these other kind of hostile architectures, like these sort of barriers and fences that have really become characteristic of these public housing developments. And of course, and then observing the deterioration of the benches. That's why I added that photo on the top right. But these also light up. And so in the kind of process of designing and literally during the process of designing these finding that, lighting in our public realm is also, I think, a kind of hostile agent. But again, we push up against the residents' desire for even more lighting to make it safe. So what is our imagination, and how are we contending with these different forces? So even during this project, more lighting was added to the campus. So we had to sort of figure out where can we place these sort of artworks in a way that they'll sort of work, right?
That's a really interesting point about lighting. I hadn't really thought, when is lighting hostile and when is lighting atmospheric? I don't know, what's the other, welcoming, again, those same words that I keep saying. That's a really interesting way to think about it. You think they added more light because? Why did they add more light?
Even more safe at night. So again, it's like, what are our tools? And then really from both top down and bottom up, let's say, there's sometimes crude means to try to address really real concerns, right?
Yeah, that there is this underlying theme now beginning to run through that maybe we'll come back to, is the whole issue of fear and what is safety and what really makes you safe as other people. Right. There isn't any way around it. Knowing other people, having relations with other people, the evidence goes back many, many, many years, and yet design can help, design can hinder. I mean, this is true, but ultimately it's those social relations and the discursive properties that can make some of the difference. So that's a really interesting thing to add.
Right. And design can show that the public realm is always changing too, right. And that there's no permanently fixed answer to these questions. And I think that's part of it too. Yeah.
All right, well, now to Tamar.
On to you.
Tamar's been working on what many of us think is truly a new version of democratic public space. Do you want to share with the audience a little bit? What have you been up to?
Sure. So these are some of the kids in one of our playgrounds. And Trust for Public Land is an organization that is really committed to connecting people to the outdoors so they can enjoy the joys and benefits of spending time outside. For many of the reasons that you talked about, Anna, in terms of meeting other people in the outdoors, in terms of being able to move and exercise and reduce their stress levels. Maybe you guys went into a park and reduced your stress levels by going out there. Perhaps you would consider this hostile architecture. This is what all the playgrounds look like in the mid-90s and what still many of the playgrounds around New York City look like. Not only are they barren, and as one of the kids who participated in our design process said, they look like a prison yard to me. Many of them were used for parking lots. They weren't even used for playing on. And they were really meant to keep the school kids in and everybody else out. So we did this. And really worked with the city of New York, the different agencies, with city council members, politicians, all to get enough money to transform the playgrounds from that to this, and this, and this. Now, this is the same playground from that very first picture that I showed you. And perhaps some of you have fallen in love before, and maybe the first thing that made you fall in love was the looks. I certainly fell in love with this because of its looks. But falling in love doesn't stick if it doesn't make you feel something. And the things that really have worked here is that the children are part of the design process. And they are the deciders. They get to work on deciding whether there's going to be a basketball court or a pickleball court, whether there's going to be a field, whether there's going to be 10 trees or 30 trees. They are the ones. And not only are they exercising their democratic civic muscle, but they are also feeling what it's like to actually contribute to a transformation that they will benefit from. So they get to measure the yard and see what the square footage is. And they get to decide through a democratic process what it is that they're going to include within budget realities. And sometimes they come up with things that are a little extraordinary, like we want a pool, or a zip line, or a petting zoo. And sometimes we try and meet them halfway. So in this example, they asked for a petting zoo, and we convinced them that they didn't really want a goat. What they wanted was butterflies and bees, so we gave them a pollinator garden. It gives kids a place to play, and one of the deals that we make with the school principal is you get a brand spanking new playground for the kids, which will attract new families to your school. And in exchange, you have to open that schoolyard. You have to unlock those gates after school hours and on the weekends. And this is what happens. Kids come after class, after school, and they stay and they play. And they run around. And the broader community also benefits. So this is a school in the Lower East Side. Right across the street was a senior home. And the school invited the seniors to come and be part of the participatory design. And there was a garden that was planned to be part of the school. And they found that the elders wanted to be part of the gardening, but they couldn't bend down because of their knees. And so we were able to build planters that allowed them to plant without bending down. And what this has done is a transformation, not just one playground at a time, but a whole system. And Marta is really the one who pointed this out to me, is that it's an ecosystem of transformation, right? Each playground has about 30 trees. We've planted over 8,000 trees across the city. We have some resilience built into it, some climate resilience infrastructure, so it captures stormwater. The trees also provide shade. And we have over 220 playgrounds that have been completely transformed, and some more have been designed. And it's really instigated a national movement. So Trust for Public Land has built these playgrounds across the country. We can't do it on our own. And so this past April, we worked with Senator Heinrich from New Mexico to introduce the Revitalizing America's Schoolyards Act, which would provide, if passed, federal money to go into communities that aren't as wealthy as New York to provide funding for these kinds of schoolyard transformations.
Incredible. All right. So those are some wonderful ways that we can really move from hostile architecture to having the kinds of public spaces we'd like to have. I'm going to turn to Marta again for just one moment and just say, I want to say just a little, I'll say a little bit first, that, and before I go to our final question, I did want to say a little bit about what is CUNY's contribution here, and then we'll go back to a more general discussion. I was going to say something a little bit about the Public Space Research Group here at the Graduate Center that has been supported for the last, I guess, 25 years. And that we are not out there making new parks, but we are out there researching them and trying to understand what makes the spaces really work for people. How do we get spaces that will draw everyone and make everyone feel comfortable? And we've developed methodologies that even community members can use themselves. The toolkit for the ethnographic assessment of space. We've written lots of books. We've done reports for the City of New York, the State of New York, and the National Park Service. So we see ourselves as contributing, I guess, information, basic research, which wasn't always available on these parks before, and trying to open up general knowledge of what could make these spaces better.
Yeah, and so at this Spitzer School, and this is a photo of the public space that's on the City College campus, public space that is also gated and can be closed off, following some of Jerome's comments earlier. But what we do at the Spitzer School is we offer access to excellence in education and architecture and the allied arts to the citizens of the children of the citizens of New York and the metropolitan region. That in and of itself is a democratizing project. We're the foremost public school of architecture in the city, and our hope is through the work that we do to change the future of architecture. In fact, we are changing the future of architecture. It's one of the first things I ever said in a public meeting in my newer role as dean rather than historian. And so we offer an opportunity to students, we also offer the possibility of transformation to our students, to our school, and to the professions of architecture, landscape architecture, and urban design, and now urban studies in our new major. And like Setha describes in her description of the public space working group, our faculty produce knowledge, they advance knowledge. They advance knowledge in the way that Jerome has shown you through design. I am partial, pretty extraordinary design, I would say, but, and then in more conventional academic ways. And so one of the projects that we're up to is directly related to the topic of this symposium, which is that every other year, the Contemporary Cultural Center in Barcelona, the CCCB, for the past 25 years, has been running a competition, a prize for the best design in public space in Europe. And on the occasion of the 25th anniversary, the CCCB approached us at Spitzer to collaborate on an exhibition that will display the best work. And I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud that we were chosen, and I'm told we were chosen in part because we have longstanding connections with Barcelona through faculty and students, but also because we're both public institutions. And that means the world to me. And so we'll be hosting this exhibit. I hope you all come up, called Design Matters in Favor of Urban Public Space. We'll start with, we'll have the opening on September 10th. You're all welcome. And we'll be hosting a series of colloquia dealing with design. I'm hoping that the chief architect of Barcelona will be there. She's amazing. And that some of our own advocates for public design, urban public space design will be there as well. There will also be a colloquium on housing and a colloquium on care. And then also in September, Jerome and I are co-PIs on the Harlem Incubator for Place, Memory, and Culture. It's been my privilege to work with Jerome on this project, and there will be a symposium the week after Design Matters opens, and I'm going to hand this to you to describe, because this is your baby.
Sure. So yeah, we really hope you come to this. We're going to be really sort of culminating and celebrating this 3-year project, which really is bridging sort of design with public scholarship and community activism. And so we're going to be gathering a number of folks from around the country and from New York to talk about what is a built archive and how does Harlem sit within a constellation of communities and expansive preservation practices.
So please come.
So please come.
Yeah, so we're doing a lot here, and but I wanted to return back to our panelists to throw out a few more ideas maybe about what we can be doing. And are you willing to be first? I mean, if you had to pick one thing that you could do, I don't know, I said to make space, public space in particular, including sidewalks. And I include sidewalks since they're so contested at this point. I think we want to remember that our streets and our sidewalks and our schoolyards and our parks and our plazas are all public, as well as our libraries and the library steps. If there was one thing you could do to make them more welcoming or making them more available for everyone, what would you do?
One thing I'd love to see is food carts at every public plaza, and I know that sounds silly, but I'm obviously getting that idea from William White's documentary, The Social Life of Small Urban Places, that he filmed decades ago, and one of the things he found was that if there is food available, a plaza or a square instantly becomes more lively. You have all different ages, and it just is something to bring people together.
There's nothing silly about it. I mean, food I think one of the most important things we can be doing in New York City is more gardens with the cooking of the food and with the garden of the market and the cooking of the food all happening in a public space that includes all of it. I mean, I think it's brilliant. It's sustainable, it's social, it has the discursive part, it has all of the pieces, and we can design it beautifully, I assume. All right, thank you. Marta, if you could do one thing.
I would ask Mayor Mamdani to fund Jerome's and Tamar's projects.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, what if you had to do it yourself? What would you do yourself personally? You can't put it off on other people. Come on, Marta.
No, I have to ask for money all the time.
Well, you can ask for money, I know, but you personally, what would you do? I kind of have a guess, but you tell me.
I would talk to people is what I would do. Yeah. I would make no decision without talking to people. This is something that's been central to our Harlem project. We describe it as we walk down the hill to talk to our community partners, and we ask our students to learn to listen to the people for whom they're working. And this is what Tamar does. That's why those projects are so amazing.
Yeah.
It's people, the communities are engaged in design in ways that are meaningful, impactful, that's not even a word, but they're meaningful. And they put the designer, the young designer, the learning designer, the older designer in a position of responsibility to clients that will transform our cities. Yeah.
Okay. I think that's, I thought you might throw children in there somewhere. I just somehow knew it. Jerome, if you got, maybe you're doing it, that's fair to say, but you could say a little more about it.
You took two of mine, which is fund me and her, and fund, really fund these agencies. I think that's such a big part of this. And then I think it would be great, there's some amazing new folks in the mayoral administration, and I think we could use more artists and architects or people trained in those disciplines in the administration, even more. When you were speaking, it's getting hotter. And so I think more types of infrastructure and architecture that provides shade and cooling is going to be even more important.
Right. We haven't even begun to touch all the climate issues, but I'm not suggesting we go there. Right now, I'm just trying to make us the most welcoming place you could ever want to be. Tamar?
When I first came to New York 25 years ago, I was like, wow, this place is so dense. there's so many buildings everywhere, and how can there possibly be any open space? And there are almost 2,000 parks in New York, which I find truly extraordinary. But one thing that I would do is really look at those spaces that aren't used. There's still so many vacant lots, abandoned rail, all sorts of underused spaces, and they could be repurposed into places that are actually usable, welcoming, and fun to be in. And that was really the idea of my predecessors around the schoolyards. They're already owned by the city. Like, you don't have to buy land at the cost that land costs in New York. And so it is really, how do we repurpose land that the city already owns? And in many ways, the Department of Transportation and the Parks Department is doing just that. They are repurposing plazas, they are planting trees, they're looking at putting in bathrooms even, which is great for all of us. And so, yes, that's what I would do.
So, I think that would make, I think what I would add to that is thinking more about linking up all those spaces. I think what you do come to New York, it feels so dense, but there must be better ways that we could be linking all of our public spaces. Because for me, I have two wishes really. One is that we got more than 1% of the budget every year so that you could fund parks at all. I mean, that we really, it's crazy. We don't fund our parks, and they are so important. And we're not trying to tell you how important they are. We're hoping you've all come because you already know it. That's why you're here to listen about hostile architecture. But not only having a budget that funds it, but also to begin to think about the planning of our city, the future of our city from the point of view of public space, from the point of view of open space, from the point of view of sustainable space, that we begin to reverse plan this dense city of ours to make the public spaces and the green spaces and the social spaces the central motif of everything. To kind of think about it the other way around. I liked Tamar when you first came. I felt the same way. It's so dense, and that there are so many parks, and yet you don't always feel the connection. I think that that's something we could all strive for, and that would help with our climate problems as well. I just read a paper today that, we're the canary in the mine. Is that the metaphor that for climate change, and all of these kinds of questions are not just social, they're environmental as well, and we need to be thinking about it holistically. Do any of the rest of you want to bring up, you want to say something?
Yeah,
okay.
just, I think, Anna, you're the one who mentioned the loneliness epidemic, or maybe it was you, Setha. In 2023, the Surgeon General came out with a report on the epidemic of loneliness in America. And when you come to New York, it's also dense with people, and everywhere you turn, there's people, and yet even in New York, there's an epidemic of loneliness. And one of the things that we've noted is that when people are engaged in a participatory process, whether it's planning a schoolyard or planning a park, or maybe even planning an art installation, they meet people that have a interest like theirs that they wouldn't otherwise meet. And those friendships are not only extraordinary because they have a common interest, but they last because they're neighbors of theirs. And so then when there's something else, they get invited, or when there's an emergency, they go and knock on the door and make sure that that person's okay. So the power of that participatory process extends so far beyond just the design of that, whatever it is that we're designing.
Well, and that brings you back to, again, Anna's film. What does it do to our subways if we have benches that you can only lean on?
It makes them less hospitable. It makes them spaces that were once perhaps a place where you could chat with the person next to you or just take a breath. Now it's a place that's much more tense. And I think it adds to any kind of broader loneliness or anxiety that's going on for everyone.
Yeah, the one thing about that term hostile architecture that I think is worth thinking about is that if you assume that there is more fear and more loneliness and and people want to feel safe, all of this, quote, hostile architecture, the lack of benches, that whenever I want to sit down at the train station, I can no longer sit down. It drives me wild. But that communicates to everyone that you should be afraid. You're communicating, all of it communicates symbolically, as you say, discursively to be more, communicates that this is not a place for you to be and for no one else to be, and that you're worried about the wrong people being there. You're constantly re-saying, re-inscribing fear and a lack of safety on our landscape. And that isn't what we want. We want those kids sitting on the bench.
Yeah, I would think also it even, to me, it says that you don't matter as a person, right? That you're not important. That my response to being in the Moynihan Station, and I really love the way you wrote about that, Anna, is that they're not supposed to sit down, but people do sit down. People do sit down on their suitcases, right? There are people sitting everywhere,
yeah.
and then they're getting chased by the guards. And so it isn't only that it's not that you need to be afraid. It's also that you don't belong. I mean, who here remembers the benches in Grand Central Station? I mean, Ted, you must remember them. I remember them, and when the benches in Grand Central Station were taken out, it was such an assault on us as citizens of the city that we could not sit on a bench and wait for a train in a station that had been built just, you know, as we were escaping the so-called Gilded Age. I find the profound disrespect for the citizen, for the person, to be deeply, deeply troubling in the decision to not have benches in train stations. I think about a mother with her kids, you know, where's she gonna sit? Yeah. Where are children gonna wait? Where are the elderly gonna go? I mean, do you have to have a ticket in order to be able to sit down? And then even if you do have a ticket, you can't sit down in the subway station. So I think probably the illustration of the temper of our time in ways that I think we need to be very, very concerned about. And you know, when I wanted to say one thing, but I think of that, and I think of that wonderful article you wrote about Sesame Street, and I think about, and I loved that piece, and the way in which the architecture of Sesame Street has embedded in it democratic possibility in so many ways. And you compare that to Penn Station, and I think we got a real problem here, folks. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say one more to our journalists. What is your role in all of this?
I think bringing awareness and platforming all of your voices and concerns, and the other side of it too, of course, and just keeping these things in the public conversation. And today, I think it's more than just writing about it. It's really showing with visuals and meeting people where they are and how they want to consume, and where conversations are happening on social media or elsewhere.
Great. That's what we do want you to do that. Because we want to, quote, publicize, make public space still really important in our city.
Can I just add one more quick thing too about train stations? I think the reason it's so important to look at those is because that is a place that brings together everybody. Blue-collar workers, white-collar workers, people of all ages, races, backgrounds. If we're taking away social interaction from those places, we're further dividing those groups who might, you know, we have tons of interaction in the workplace or in school, but a place like the train station really breaks through all of those divides.
Yeah, I mean, the evidence about New York City, and I guess many of you know that large cities are actually quite segregated. In other words, by where we work or where we live and where we go to school. But the one thing I noted on Tamar when I first came was that subway, and that you could sit there and be on the subway with what I considered everyone, every language, everything on my F train, and I would get a view of the whole world for myself. And it always was a way of opening up to everybody and talking to everyone. And that's, Anna, you got a tough job, but to keep reminding us that there's a whole world out there. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much to our panelists for being so good. Thank you to our out there audience, and I hope you all go out there and make our spaces better. Thank you.